Have you ever heard of the Upside Down folk? I hadn't. It was an urban legend that I thought my college friend had probably made up. But seeing as how I was a film student and the town that legend was supposed to be from was roughly between my college campus and my parents' home another state away, I couldn't pass up on the opportunity to stop there. With a camera, of course. I had been meaning to make a little ham-hand documentary of some creepy little urban legend or other. By the way, do you still call it an urban legend if it's in a rural area? I guess you would just call it a folktale, although that term doesn't really seem to fit. I don't know for sure if it was in my friend's hometown. When I pressed him about it, he laughed nervously, said things like, "Why does it matter?" That made me think that it did matter, but I got nowhere when I kept pressing him, other than him saying that he had some friends from high school who had talked a lot about the Upside Down folk, and how everyone around town knew about it. And other than what he told me about how the Upside Down folk supposedly lived upside down in an old railway tunnel and sometimes abducted people. Anyway, the summer of my junior year in college was when I stopped in that little southern town with my film equipment. I can tell you that I was attending the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, but I will not tell you the name of that town in Alabama. My friend sure told me its name and how to get there. This was definitely a little town, population probably in the low hundreds. If my friend had gone to high school there, he might have been able to count his graduating class on his hands. The people were friendly enough, or seemed friendly enough. Having grown up in the South myself, I knew that there was a difference between real Southern hospitality and the fake kind. With those people in that town, I couldn't tell which one it was. After exiting the highway, I went down some heavily wooded county roads before being deposited into an old-timey downtown-looking area. You know the kind. It has the old wooden buildings squeezed together, post office, liquor store, drugstore, grocery store, and the like. A town hall made of brick loomed over and beyond these smaller wooden buildings. A family sold boiled peanuts, watermelons, and deer jerky outside a ramshackle sheriff's station. I saw a tall, thin building without a sign that I hoped was a motel, for my convenience. I had never seen any sign with the town's name on it. Maybe that was on another way in, or else I had missed it. But I knew that this had to be the town from my friend's directions. "You guys don't happen to have any gift shops dedicated to the Upside Down folk, do you?" I said to the clerk at the drugstore. "I've heard they got something like that up in Point Pleasant in West Virginia, for the Mothman." "Do what now?" the clerk said. He was an old man whose skin was tight and red from days and days in the sun. So tight and beet red that you could barely make out the wrinkles on it. "I'm a film student at the University of Alabama," I said. "I want to make a little documentary about your urban legend, or folktale, or whatever you want to call it. The Upside Down folk." "You're gonna have to speak up, son. My hearing ain't too good." "The Upside Down folk." I didn't realize that I was nearly shouting until it came out of my mouth. The clerk's face spasmed, became looser like a tight ball of yarn beginning to unspool. Behind me, a couple of people, it was a mother and her son, stopped their rustling around on some shelves and they stopped their polite whispering. They got all still and quiet. "That's one of them kids' things," the old drugstore clerk said. "That's something those youngins like to talk about. You're gonna have to ask them. Or don't ask them. Me, I'm a grown-ass man." Whereas before, his expression had been all genial, even when he hadn't seemed to have heard me. After that, it became as cross as a priest chastising someone in a church. "Oh," I said. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to." "You can find the Upside Down folk," said a voice behind me. "Past Redacted, just a ways northwest of Redacted in the woods. But it ain't exactly all woods. Mister, you'll see some." I turned around after the voice had been cut off. The mother was covering her son's mouth on the aisle that they had been shopping in. She looked scared. The son seemed to be in his early teens, maybe in middle school or junior high. "Thank you," I said. The mother shook her head at me. I bought a few snacks in there as a thick, guilty sort of silence hung over everything. When I waved goodbye to those three in the drugstore, no one returned my wave. But the minute that I stepped into the signless, taller building a few buildings down, I was serenaded with a "How are ya? Welcome to the such and such," in just the friendliest voices you can imagine. Face-splitting grins, laughing at everything that I said. "You guys really ought to have a sign out front," I said at one point. "It's probably bad for business." In other contexts, that might have upset some people off by telling them how to run their business. But the motel clerk, the handyman, and the motel owner laughed their butts off at that. They were all at the front and eager to please anyone who walked through the door. The motel owner, the older woman who seemed dressed up for a ball, kept calling me Golden Boy after I told her that I was studying film in college and looking to shoot a documentary there. I bit my tongue when I almost mentioned the Upside Down folk. They did not ask what the documentary in their town would be about. Crap, I thought. I should have been filming in the drugstore earlier. That would have been great. After I rented a room, I got my suitcase and gear out of my car, went upstairs and unloaded it in a small but clean and antiquely finished room. And then I took my camera equipment out. No tripod, just a mic and a camera on my shoulder. I thought it might be grittier if I didn't use a tripod. I worked myself up, said a few lines into the microphone, and went downstairs. I lowered the camera when I got to the front desk. "Okay if I ask you a few things for the documentary," I said to the clerk, a young woman who seemed about my age. The hotel manager-owner, who was seeming more and more like her grandmother or something, leaned out from the side room. "Sure, darling," she said, speaking for the younger woman. "We don't mind. Not for you, Golden Boy." I waited for the younger woman to nod. "Okay," I said. I did some lead-up questions, as you do for interviews. I can't very well jump into the controversial ones at the start. The young woman, her name was Bethany Ann, was shy but very nice. And once she had opened up, she had a lot to say about their motel business, about how and where she had grown up, about where she had gone to school, and about her dreams of going to college herself at some point, once they had saved up enough money. She wanted to do something business-related to help her mother. Apparently, her mother had been pretty old when she had her. Her father had died from alcoholism and possession. "Possession," I said. "You mean of drugs? You mean he got in trouble with the law for possession of drugs?" "No," she said. "A devil got inside him." "Oh," I said. I let out an uneasy breath. "A devil got inside me," she said, "but I shook it loose." Her mother was next to her, nodding affirmation. "Okay," I said, thinking to myself. Even if these people are acting, this is going to be gold. I took a moment to double-check to make sure that I had been recording. And I hadn't even gotten to the Upside Down folk yet. Now, I just want to stop right here and say that I grew up in a small southern city myself. The last thing that I want to do is perpetuate some unfortunate stereotypes of southern people. We're not all crazy. Behind the times, rednecks who think that every other ailment is related to something spiritual. And I don't think many of those people in that town were that way either. That young woman that I talked to conducted herself as intelligently as many of my college peers did, and she seemed to have more ambition than a lot of them to boot. So, when I mentioned the Upside Down folk to them, the mother did something weird. Instead of covering her daughter's mouth, as the mother in the drugstore had done with her son to shut him off, this woman rushed over and put her hands over both of her daughter's ears. The grandmother, mother, and proprietor of the motel, struck me as the kind of person who liked to nod a lot when others were talking. An affirmation, an interest, or just to let you know that she was listening. Now, she was nodding furiously, even though her smile said otherwise. "You let us know if you need anything," she said. Okay, I just wanted to get a little more for the... We gotta get back to business now, she said, the drawl in her tone sweet, but sweet like rotten molasses. It got to be evening not long after I had settled in. I kicked my feet up on the desk beside the bed and side of the wall where I thought a TV should be. Someone knocked at my door. It was the handyman, and he had a bowl full of what appeared to be chicken, vegetables, and dumplings in a thick white sauce, toast on the side, a bottle of soda with its metal cap beside it. Cool vapor smoked out of the top of the bottle. It all looked and smelled very good. I never ordered room service, I said. It must be for someone else. Well, there's no one else here, he said, and we ordinarily don't have room service anyways. All right, I said, I'll take it. How much do I owe you? On the house, he said. He gave me a meaty smile. Let me know if that's enough. I can make something more for you if you want it. As I walked off with the tray, I noticed the handyman lingering. I quickly set the tray down on the desk and began fishing my wallet out for a tip. Oh, don't bother, he said. I was just gonna say, about the upside-down folk. I overheard you talking about them to the ladies. Wait, I thought. I don't even have my camera out. Hold that thought, I started to say, as I moved towards my camera case. I just wanted to tell you to not mention that to them again, to the ladies. You do that one thing and we'll be right as rain. You do that one thing and I'll fix your breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I lifted my hand from the camera case's zipper. I said, okay. That night, as I lay in bed streaming some old Nick at Night episodes on my phone, I thought about the 2 brief directions that the boy in the drugstore had given me before he had been cut off by his mother. I decided that the next day, I would just have to try and find that place where the upside-down folk were said to be. Said to be by that kid anyway. I would take a camera down there and see for myself. If anything, I might get some rustic footage of scenery that's appealing for the documentary. After that, maybe I would get back to questioning people around town. The next day, I would just dive on into the deep end, as they say. Try to swim straight to the source. I didn't know then just how deep that was going to get. There was a tunnel. As I started to drift off to sleep, another knock at the door. At first, I thought I was dreaming it. I got up, heart pounding too hard for that to be a dream. Maybe the knock had been. But then I opened the door. There was a blank envelope. I thought that I heard movement on the stairs. Shadows in the dim hallway. Only shadows. What could this envelope be about? I picked it up. Inside, a short letter, handwritten. Don't, but if you must, it's vitally important that you finish their song. They will sing as they come towards you in the tunnel. Finish their songs with, oh ho, dirt to toe, the right side up folk we be. Otherwise, your life will be theirs. I looked around again before taking the letter back inside with me. I quickly shut and locked my motel room door. I couldn't understand. Was I being pranked, or was this a legitimate effort to help me? Was it some kind of threat? And what was all that about singing? My college friend had neglected to mention that part. And I was neglecting to film any of this. I put the letter down on the desk, shone a lamp on it, and with shaking hands, I got out my camera. As I filmed the short, unsigned letter, I did my best to summarize what had just happened. I didn't know about all that singing business. What I did know was that the next day, I would have to be on my guard. I was planning on getting a late start the following day. I did not sleep well. I don't know how much of that was because of the anonymous letter about the upside-down folk, or because of already feeling unsettled prior to that. My plans for a late start were shattered though, when I got another knock at about 7 a.m. that morning. Needless to say, that woke me up pretty quickly. I opened the door to the handyman, who was bearing another tray of food. eggs, bacon, cheese grits, and a stack of pancakes with a hearty coating of maple syrup and butter. A cup of milk, a cup of orange juice, and a bottle of water were on the side. "Breakfast," the handyman grunted at me. He wore a big smile, though there was nothing about him to remind me of his request last night to not speak of the upside-down folk to the motel owner and her daughter again. The request was implied by the tray of food. He said that he would fix breakfast, lunch, and dinner for me. He said he would do that and that we would be okay as long as I didn't speak of the upside-down folk again to the others. So here was breakfast. I remember wondering if I could talk to him about the upside-down folk, if that would be okay. I was also on the verge of asking him about the letter that someone had delivered the previous night after knocking. As I opened my mouth, his smile slipped just a tad. That threw me off. At any rate, I accepted the breakfast. I told him that it looked great and that last night's dinner was excellent, and that I would be okay if they decided to add it to my credit card. "I'm happy you liked it," he said. "It's still on the house," he winked. "Hope you enjoy that one too. I take a special pride in my breakfast. First meal of the day is the most important." Then the handyman turned and went back down the hallway towards the stairs. "Wait," I called after him. He stopped, but he did not turn back around. "Did you guys get any late-night visitors last night?" I said. There was a pause. "I'm not at liberty to discuss that," he said. "We respect the privacy of all our patrons." "Well," I said, "maybe it wasn't a patron. Maybe it was just someone who had stopped by. You see, I got a letter." "That sounds interesting," the handyman said. "But I gotta go check on a room that's been leaking. Sorry." Before I could say another word, he went around the corner and was heading downstairs. Once again, I had missed an opportunity to get some potentially intriguing footage for my little upside-down folk documentary. I thought I probably should have my camera ready for any knock at the door, but I would be leaving soon anyway for my day's adventures. Adventure is not the right word for what ended up happening that day, but that's the way I thought of it then. I quickly ate breakfast, which, despite the runniness of the eggs that was not my preference, was as good as it looked and smelled. Then I got my gear ready. On top of my camera, I went ahead and mounted a special flashlight that I had brought. According to the legend, they were supposed to be in an old train tunnel that the upside-down folk lived in. I didn't want to miss a shot of some scratches on the ceiling or something because I hadn't been able to see well enough. I would have waited until I got closer to set all that up, but I was planning to shoot everything I could on the way up there. So I put my camera on my shoulder, turned on record, and left my motel room. I was mulling over whether or not I should try to ask the motel clerk or her mother some questions before I left, while being careful not to mention the upside-down folk. But when I went downstairs, they weren't at the front desk. They didn't seem like the kind of people that would leave their post, even though they weren't exactly busy. I heard some commotion in the side room behind the desk, so I figured they would step away. When I began to wonder if maybe they had stepped away because they had heard me coming down the stairs. I filmed their absence, and once outside the motel, I also filmed some passerby. Figured if anyone complained, I would stop. I tried to ask two middle-aged women walking towards the grocery store if they were okay for a brief interview. They just said, "Good morning," smiled at me and kept walking. Another woman was dragging along her two kids and they stared at me. Did the whole town, as little as it was, have some kind of group text going? Had they been talking about me? Well, I had not planned on interviewing anyone else before I went to the supposed source anyway. So I just got in my car with the brief directions that other kid in the drugstore had given me. He hadn't told me which direction the first street he had mentioned was in, but I pretty quickly figured it out with the phone's GPS. Going west, I left the motel, drug and grocery stores, the sheriff's station, and all the other buildings in that old-timey town center behind. I quickly passed the first street that the boy in the drugstore had said I would. On the next road he mentioned, I supposed I was meant to take a left or a right. I ended up taking a right because he had said something about going northwest off the 2nd Street. All that time, I was passing homes of some of the townspeople. Everything from trailer homes to cottages and ranch-style houses. I saw a field of cotton and a few cows peering at my car from behind a rusted, barbed wire fence. The road that I had taken a right on eventually dead-ended. Large bladed grass and vine-clad trees formed an almost barrier around the dead end. I say almost a barrier because I could see a path through on the right, a little walking path of many feet having trodden down. And already through this window in the vegetation, I glimpsed the ruins of an old building beyond. I parked my car in the grass just past the dead end. I got out, put my camera on my shoulder, and put that sucker on record. Time for that rustic scenery, I thought. Beyond the dead end, there were abandoned buildings and shacks poking out of trees and undergrowth. Thick vines and weeds sometimes grew out of open doorways, and windows like internal organs coming out of mouths. The further I went, the more it became apparent that this had all been either an older abandoned sector of the town, or else its own town. Who had been living here and why had they just abandoned it? Had they been the ancestors of those I had seen, or another people entirely? Rust and decay were everywhere, and the vegetation of the woods busted and broke those buildings where possible. After about an hour of wandering through those ruins, I spotted a railway running through the high grass. When I followed that railway, I saw it, a long structure that extended into the woods, disappearing behind thicker growth. The tunnel. I had been filming everything I could. By then, I began to worry that my camera would slip out of my sweating, shaking hands. I remember pausing to put my camera down, wipe my sweaty hands on my shirt, and rest for a minute. But then I put my camera back on my shoulder and stepped onto the old railway. From there, I could easily see the dark mouth of the tunnel. I filmed all the way up to it, talking all the while. I'm not sure how much of that was for dramatic effect for the documentary, or just to calm my nerves. But it quickly became apparent as I got closer that there was no light at the end of that tunnel. Just before entering that railway tunnel, I stopped at its outer edges. The old stone was cracked in places, but none of it appeared to have crumbled, at least not near the front of it. Why couldn't I see the light from the opening on its other end? Had there been a cave-in further down? Or had the woods on the other side completely or nearly completely obscured the light? Maybe, I thought. The tunnel curves farther ahead. I switched on the flashlight that I had mounted on my camera and shined it into the tunnel. I didn't see any spiderwebs or rats or anything moving about, but that tunnel went much further than my light could penetrate. I stepped inside. The ground was wet and soft. When I shined my light over the bottom of the tunnel, there seemed to be a layer of detritus of dead leaves and perhaps other dead things. It seemed to be yellowish red, and it even covered the railway tracks themselves. Won't be any trains coming anytime soon, I joked aloud. It didn't take long for me to wish that I had not spoken in that tunnel. My voice echoed around until it no longer seemed to belong to me. I walked for a long time, painting the ceiling and walls with my camera-mounted flashlight, recording everything I pointed my camera at. I did see scratches, and I saw indentations in the ceiling that looked like the footprints or claw prints of some large animals. That almost made me turn back. But in the name of my little documentary and the creepy footage I thought that I was getting, I persisted. I kept telling myself that the tunnel would curve and that then I would begin to see the light. I kept looking back at the way behind me, sometimes because I thought I had heard something other than my own movement, and I kept noticing how that circle of light was receding. I got to the point that I wondered if railway tunnels were supposed to be this long. Maybe I was going under a hill or something. I had been walking in that tunnel for maybe 45 minutes to an hour when I had first heard it. Something was moving up ahead, beyond the beam of my light. Tentative at first, a little scattered, but then a bit more organized. It was also about that time that I saw a hole in the upper wall. I shined my light into it. It was a large burrow. I could see a little into that burrow, and within there was a couch hanging upside down, as if nailed or glued to the ceiling. I cursed under my breath. I started to go back, walking so as to not attract attention. But then I heard the singing. It began low, as an echoing whisper. I started walking more quickly back towards the railway tunnel entrance. More voices joined in, and the volume grew. I can't recall all the lyrics, but I can tell you that what they sang had to do with making other things upside down. At one point, they even sang about dismembering a human body and rearranging its parts so that it could move more easily upside down. As the volume increased, so did the number of voices. It struck me how quickly they were gaining volume, until I understood them to be running towards me as they sang. I turned around and I saw them, and filmed them. I did not see all of them before turning back around. Only a bunch of pairs of gangly limbs hanging down. Those arms were freakishly long enough to reach towards the bottom of the railway tunnel. They were all moving together, like some kind of upside-down train. That's when I started running. My camera, still in record, bounced along on my shoulder. The singing intensified. The closer they got, the more I realized something I had been trying to avoid thinking about. The closer they got, the more those voices sounded less and less human. I also realized that I could not run fast enough to get away. They would overtake me. And those arms. That note that I had gotten, I berated myself for not bringing it. Even though I doubted I would have enough time to stop and reread it. What was I supposed to sing back to them? The singing got so close that I was becoming too frantic. So much so that I was not paying attention. One of my feet snagged in the old rails beneath the detritus. My camera flew out of my hands and off my shoulder. I fell on my face, tasting the awful, mysterious rot on the floor of the tunnel. They were just above, like a crowd or horde of people suddenly stopped. I thought I could feel a long fingernail of one of those dangling arms scratching the back of my neck. Even though they were way up there in the ceiling and I was face down at the bottom of the tunnel. Then, in voices that by now were so inhuman that they were like knives cutting away the strands of my nervous system, they sang, "Hi-ho, diddly-o, the upside-down folk we be. How toe and answer below, who pray tell are thee?" I remembered from that note that I had gotten that this would not be the final line. The final line of their song. I did not know what that meant for me, but I had some theories. I was supposed to sing something back, or else. Oftentimes, fear makes us forget things, but I think it must have helped me recall the lines that I had read the previous night. I twisted around onto my back. I did not open my eyes. I heard a kind of chuckling from one of the things above me. I was on the verge of tears as I sang. "Oh ho, dirt to toe, the right side up folk we be." The chuckling continued from a voice above. Something touched my forehead. "Please," I said, "please." And then there was like a breath, or a collection of breaths that ran through the tunnel. It stirred my hair around. It was so rancid that I stopped breathing out of my nose. Eventually, I opened my eyes. Whatever it was that had been pursuing me and then was above me, they were gone. I retrieved my camera, finding it to still be on and recording, and hauled tail out of that railway tunnel. I sprinted all the way back through the wooded ruins of that old abandoned town. I only paused to suck in oxygen. Even after I got in my car and ripped up dirt and grass to get back in the street, I kept peering in my mirror as I drove. While I did not linger in the still populated and running downtown area, I did stop by long enough to check out of the motel and file a report at the sheriff's. I was curt with Bethany Ann and her mother at the front desk when I checked out. At the sheriff's, I gave some BS report about how I had been chased in the tunnel by some dangerous looking people. I just wanted someone to go down there and check it out. A shriveled old man whose badge seemed to take up half his chest blinked at me with hollow looking eyes. "We get reports about that place all the time," he said. "Best to stay clear of Old Town and its train tunnel." That was as much as I got from the sheriff in response, but I didn't hang around to get more information about those other reports. I was eager to leave that town, and the other town with its train tunnel next to it, behind. At my parents' home during my summer break, directly after all that happened, I got all wishy-washy about the documentary. Without reviewing it, I downloaded all the footage that I had taken to my computer, and then I deleted it, and then I restored it from my recycle bin. I slept on it uneasily before deciding to permanently delete it. But not long after that, I noticed it was still on my computer. The footage that might include the upside down folk themselves, was for some reason or other difficult to get rid of. I left it there for the time being, while still not having the courage to review it just yet. And then something else happened. I had never sleepwalked before, but one night about a week after I had visited that town, I woke up sitting in the driver's side of my vehicle, parked outside of my parents' house. My keys were in my pocket. I woke up thinking about that tunnel and the upside down folk. What if I had tried to drive back out there, even though I didn't want to? What if I went into the tunnel again, but this time didn't sing the words that I was supposed to, because I was too afraid, or because... After that, I permanently deleted the footage on my computer, and I sold that computer towards buying a new one. I spent the following days making myself as busy as possible, so that I would not think of the upside down folk. By the end of that summer, I was feeling better about things, and I was even wishing that I had kept my footage. As for my college friend, the one who had first told me about the upside down folk, I wasn't able to reach him by phone that summer or afterwards. The following semester, I couldn't find him on campus. When I searched the student directories, I got nothing, and he never had been on social media to begin with.